Back when I was in fourth, maybe fifth grade, I remember I was at daycare, either after school or on a Saturday, and all of the other kids who happened to be there at the daycare had gotten permission slips signed to go to Binder Park Zoo, I think, and that afternoon was the field trip, and I hadn't heard about it or I had no inclination to go, and so I didn't get the permission slip signed and wound up having to stick around at the daycare center by myself. Well, all of the other kids boarded the bus to go off to the zoo. And I remember one of my friends, Josh Bailey, as he was being filed out to get onto the bus, looking back, seeing me sitting there forlorn as the only student left at the daycare. And as much as I enjoyed some of my supervisors, I was not looking forward to an entire date with just the adults. And I remember him looking back at me sitting there and telling the supervisors that he had changed his mind. He didn't really want to go to the zoo that badly. And he stuck around and hung out with me that day. And I remember being so moved, even as a fifth grader, by that loyalty that he showed, by that attention and self-sacrifice that he showed in our friendship there, that it stuck with me. Obviously, I'm preaching about it. And I think I've actually used that in a daily mass homily or in a school homily before, so if you've been at some of my daily masses, sorry, it's a great story, you get to hear it again. But I think in our society, especially in our day and age, we have done a disservice in belittling the role of friend in our lives. That friendship can sometimes simply become the other box that we check when we're not really sure, like this person isn't a blood relative and it's not a romantic interest, so I guess you just default to friend. Jesus, however, and I think our whole Catholic faith helps us to understand the powerful role that friendship can play in our lives and ought to play in our lives. That in friendship, outside of our immediate family, we not only have the chance to learn about what God's love for us looks like, when Jesus calls us friend, what that means, but we have the chance to exercise and practice the virtue of charity as well. That real friendship, if it's of any sort of lasting or significant kind, is going to demand self-sacrifice of me. And hopefully, I'm going to bear witness to that in the life of my friend for me as well. That St. Thomas Aquinas recognized the importance of this in his own theological works. That he famously said, looking at all of the many gifts in nature with which God has blessed us as a human race, that there is nothing on earth more to be prized than true friendship. That he saw that as one of the single most important things that God has given us. That obviously there are spiritual gifts that are greater, but on a natural level, friendship is it. Because and Thomas, having studied Aristotle in depth, one of the things that he draws from Aristotle is the statement that if a man had all of the gifts on planet Earth except friendship, that man would find himself miserable because he would have no one with whom to share those gifts. That as human beings, we are intimately social creatures, and we don't do well either in finding fulfillment as human beings, becoming fully ourselves, or in finding true happiness without friendship. Arthur Brooks, who I've cited before, Harvard professor, extraordinary scholar, and devout Catholic, he commented on this once, that he said there have been studies that have been done analyzing what it is that's led to the success of older people who consider themselves to be deeply happy. people who have led long lives and find themselves fairly satisfied in those lives. And he said they estimate somewhere around 60% of their happiness, or of whether or not someone winds up happy in old age, is directly attributable to the quality of their friendships, whether those are platonic or romantic. So incorporating spousal relationships into this as well. That loving relationships with other people are the determining factor for a majority of the happiness of us as we grow older. And I don't think that should surprise us terribly. And I think if we pay attention in our readings this weekend, we see evidence of that. That our first reading is profoundly unhelpful because it gives us a very tiny snapshot and insight into a much more interesting story. So it's as if the church just gave us this little taste of the story and was hoping that we'd just go home and read the rest of it. But what we get doesn't explain or do justice to what happens here. That Elisha, one of the great men of God of the Old Testament, the disciple and successor of Elijah, a profoundly holy man of God, an extraordinary miracle worker, who could, if he chose, no doubt, be sustained by God in the wilderness with ravens feeding him as they did his boss. But even Elisha relies on friends to get by. That there's this Shunammite woman that the story tells us Elisha became friends with, that he would regularly stop by their house when he was in the area. They would serve him dinner. After a while, we're told in the story that she and her husband even made him up a whole guest room. Okay, I have to think that's kind of cool, that if one of the most important prophets on the face of the earth was a close enough friend with you that you actually had a guest room for him, that feels like a big deal. That they provided, that friendship provided an opportunity for them to show charity to him, and then as the story goes on, for him to show that back. That Elisha asks his own disciple, his own manservant, is there anything I could do for them? It was a well-to-do family. There wasn't much he could do for them financially, being an itinerant prophet. But he wondered what kind of blessing could he bestow upon them in friendship. And he was told that as much as they had tried, they never had a son, that this couple was barren. And Elisha, in affection, tells her, next time I come and see you next year, you're going to be holding a bouncing baby boy. And the reaction he gets from her, which is not included in this passage that we heard at Mass today, is fascinating. That she doesn't react immediately with joy. She doesn't react with, oh, thanks, that's awesome. She almost pushes back against him. No, she doesn't almost, she does. That she responds, to paraphrase, by saying, like, don't lie to me, Elisha. Like, don't you screw with me too. That it becomes very clear very quickly that this is something that's a deep wound for this woman. Like, as much of a woman of means as she is, the implication is that she's tried hard to have a kid and probably gone to see doctors and probably gone to holy people to have them pray for her and has accomplished nothing through that. And that this was a wound and probably a sore spot in her relationship with God, if she were honest. It seems it has to be for her response to Elisha to be so emotionally charged that she pushes back this hard. But Elisha persists, and he's like, no, it's going to happen. And sure enough, it does. Praise God, she and her husband, in spite of their old age, are able to raise a son. And as he gets older, he and his dad are out working in the field, and the son develops a nasty migraine and then goes home and dies. The mom doesn't tell her husband right away. She takes him, puts him on, interestingly, not his bed, but Elisha's bed, and then asks where Elisha is. Her husband asks if everything's okay. She pushes him away, goes, yeah, everything's fine, things are good. Clearly they're not, but she is an emotionally very private woman. She finds Elisha and she chews him a new one. And she looks at him and effectively goes, so why'd you let me have a son if this was the way that it was going to play out? Like, what was the point? I knew that I was going to get hurt in the first place. Like, I should have told you no. And Elisha, understandably, is beside himself. Elisha goes and he prays for the child, and in spite of the fact that this is centuries before Christ, the way that he prays for the child is fascinating, and it's maybe a little bit difficult to picture, but he goes and the child is on his bed, and he goes and kneels down and prays over the child in cruciform with his arms out at his side and lays above the child. And then the child is raised from the dead. And one could only imagine the mix of emotions going through that mom's head. Like, this wound that maybe for a minute she thought had healed in her relationship with God, that God had heard her prayers and looked upon her with mercy, that wound that she thought had scabbed over just tore open worse than it ever had before, but then God still provided for her. But she had buried that wound so deep that if it weren't for her friendship with Elisha, one wonders if it ever would have been resolved. Like, one speculates if there would have always been this anger, this simmering anger in her heart, even if it were on the back burner in her relationship with God. Like that it was through her friendship with Elisha that God was able to help her resolve that, to work through her anger, her lack of understanding, her profound distrust of God and other people, that perhaps, and the story does very little to give us direct insight into the hearts and minds of the players here, but perhaps she grew in holiness, in fulfillment as a human person, that she found healing through that friendship that God provided her with, when initially she thought she was the one providing the charity to Elisha. That both of them grew through the friendship that they had, which wouldn't have been possible if they had kept to themselves. That Jesus in the Gospels does something radical in, number one, becoming a human being in the first place. That God, the creator of the universe, actually steps into the messiness of our lives without sin, but that's the only thing the Gospels tell us that he was without. So presumably, with heartbreak and pain and illness and all of the other things that as God he could have readily avoided. And then he chooses to call us his friends, which I think already gives that word some dignity. But we forget, I think, at times that our faith is meant to be incarnational, that it's easy for our theology to become abstract to the point where it's not daily embodied in our lives. We're like, I understand God up here, but I'm not living my relationship with him out here all the time. That people can look at my life and not see obviously that I'm a Christian. Friendship takes that abstract nature of our faith and it rips it to pieces. It takes it and it forces it to be incarnate, or it tells it to die. that it is where the rubber meets the road in the practice of our faith. Because to be a good friend, I have to persistently say no to myself so I can say yes to somebody else. That I have to at numerous times throughout the course of my life choose not to get on the bus to Binder Park Zoo. Like, I have to be willing to, in love, let somebody else be first in my life. That's not me. That's one of the things that St. Thomas Aquinas does as he goes on to explain the importance of friendships. He says that friendship is a powerful school in the virtue of charity. Because friendship is a natural reality. It's something we have even outside of the practice of our faith, but it becomes elevated to a place of distinction as Christians when we recognize the important role it plays in regularly calling us to love somebody else. Because that's one of the primary goals of our faith, is to not be inwardly turned, but to allow ourselves to love somebody other than me, and simultaneously to recognize nonetheless how loved I am. Friendship enables both of those things if it's worthy of the name. In our gospel, Jesus gives us a very hard teaching. He says, "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me." Which I think is worthwhile pointing out that this was before Jesus' crucifixion. So Jesus is talking about carrying a cross around when they have no context of this whatsoever. And so it just sounds like Jesus is telling them, yeah, you need to get tortured by the Romans or you don't get to follow me. Okay, Jesus. There's a lot going on here, and they had lots of questions, I imagine. In one of the other Gospels, this passage is even harder. They say, "Whoever does not hate father or mother is not worthy of me." What's Jesus actually saying? He's engaging in hyperbole to make the very, I think if we pay attention, obvious point that love of God and love of family or friends are not in opposition to each other. We don't have to, thank God, most days ask the question, who do I love, God or my spouse? We don't most days have to ask the question, who do I love, God or my child or my parent or my best friend? Because if I love God well, I love them better. That those two are seldom mutually exclusive. Not never. There are times when our relationships can be destructive of our relationship with God, which is tragic. But most of the time, when I love Jesus first, I love others better because I love them with the love of Jesus now and not merely my own natural love. That my love for them becomes supernatural. Those of you who are married, your spouses are needier than you can ever provide. You may have noticed this already, actually. No matter how hard you try, you can never fulfill every one of their needs. Unless you think I'm leaving them out, they can't fulfill all of your needs either. You're too needy also. So let's be fair. But that's because no one can fulfill any of our needs, all of our needs except Jesus Christ. And so as long as I'm loving somebody in friendship, whether it's platonic or romance, on a purely natural level, I'm never going to be able to satisfy that person. But when it's Jesus who loves them through me as well, now all of a sudden I can provide more than on a natural level it seems like I'd be capable of. I can be a better friend, a more self-sacrificing friend, a more devoted, loyal friend than I would have been able to be naturally. That I can in fact take up that cross and follow Jesus. And so as we strive to follow this teaching of Christ, as challenging as it is, may we never underestimate the importance that friendship plays, not just in our lives, but in the practice of our faith. Because practically speaking, friendship is the place where most often you and I are learning how to love like Jesus, and we're teaching others what it means to be loved by Jesus. That that we learn the loyalty of Christ and we learn how to be loyal like Christ. That back in 4th or 5th grade, I got some small insight into that through the friendship of my buddy Josh. Christ calls us yet to more than that. He calls us to love as he did, both for our sake spiritually, but also for the sake of our friends. That it's in actually taking our abstract faith and putting it into action that we learn how to be Jesus Christ for others.